Welcome to the Ultimate Landscape CEO podcast. We have a great guest today, Chris Distefano, who reminded me on this podcast. I've known him for about 10 years, and he's been a member of our peer group, our Leader's Edge, for about 3 years. Chris is a very detailed analyzer, and we're going to get into the pros and cons of that in this podcast. His decision-making process, how it was slow, but how it's improved, his managing by metrics, how he almost goes overboard, but finds the balance, and how he is using metrics and teaching his team to use metrics. We talk about how his marathons and his triathlons and competing at that level, how it had a big impact on or it's a big reflection of his goal setting, using metrics, his use of obsession, if you will, my words, to compensate his ADD. And we talk about how he uses many of those traits in his business, including big goal setting in his business. We have a fun conversation. Chris runs Distefano Landscaping. It's a $7 million business. 55 to 60 employees, mostly install, bid, build, and design build, but around 35% maintenance and snow, based in Burlington, Vermont. You're going to learn a lot here. He really shares a lot of stuff going on personally, including at the very end, where we talk about some sports accidents that he's gotten into and how it's helping him rethink his life. And him and I share some personal anecdotes at the end here. A lot of great motivation from someone who's built what I would call a large, medium-sized business, right? But one that's been very profitable and remains profitable as he's working on doubling the size of his business. You'll really enjoy this. I hope you listen to the very end to get all the good stuff. Welcome, Chris, to my podcast.
Thanks, Jeffrey. Happy to be here.
So, Chris, I've known you for years and years, and you recently, or how many years has it been actually since you became a member of our peer group?
I think this is the third year I've been a member of the peer group, or the third season, and I've been kind of following you around for maybe 10. Some different events, and we finally connected and jumped into the peer group, I think 2.5 years ago. So
yeah, for sure. And so you got a great story. You got a lot of great, unique things about you. Tell the audience, name of your company, your mix of services. What do you kind of give us a picture of the current view of your company?
Sure. So current view of the company, we're budgeting to do about $7 million this year in revenue. Most of that, about 65% of that, is coming from installation work, and we do about half bid build, half design build. So we have 2 in-house designers and then a bid build project manager that kind of runs that side of things. And then the remainder is made up in maintenance and snow. We do about 25% snow, or 25% maintenance, maybe 10% snow. We're here in the beautiful state of Vermont and the Burlington area, which is really attracted a lot of attention, especially over the last couple of years with COVID. And we've seemed to have been in a bit of a bubble. We're kind of insulated from some of the current things happening in the economy, and we're still sort of in this boom economy right now. There's a lot of building going on. There's a lot of second homes that are still being put up along the lake. We have a lot of lakefront in Vermont on Lake Champlain, and so it's provided a lot of opportunity for us to keep up with currently. Yep. So we're still feeling like we're catching up from the COVID rush.
So did people move up from New York and say, hey, screw it, I'm going to go live up in Burlington?
Yes. Yes. A lot of people. I mean, so many of the residential design build clients that we're working with right now and have been over the last couple of years are people that sold their sold their house in Boston, or outside of Boston right at the height of the market, and moved up here to Vermont with a big pile of cash, and they paid what we would consider a huge price tag on a piece of property here, but maybe they're coming from a little townhouse in Boston and they're buying a 10 acres on the lake with an old farmhouse up here for a fraction of what they sold their place down there for. So they've had a lot of discretionary cash to improvements. So it's been really good for us, and they've been really wanting to focus on the outside. So there's a lot of that. And in addition to that, Vermont, Burlington specifically, has been doing a lot to attract business, specifically tech, to the area. We've got one business in the area that's on track to be a $1 billion business, electric planes coming out of Burlington Airport. And that's really driving a lot of new tech startups to the area. And so there's a lot of talent moving to the area too. And there's just a lot going on in general.
Does that premium price tag in real estate impact your employees' ability to afford their own homes?
Absolutely. Yeah. So, everything's comes at a cost, and the price of living, the cost of living in Vermont has, in this area in Chittenden County, has always been somewhat high. Mainly property taxes are really high, and there's a housing crunch. There's just not enough affordable housing in the area. And so to begin with, and given the upward pressure on the prices of housing, it's made it, more difficult for our staff to buy or rent, in the area. So with that, obviously wages have come up. And we have had some people that have moved out of the area, to other parts of Vermont. But this area does command a high wage, and people know that. So people are still moving here for service work because of that. So we try to offset that with our wages and doing the best we can to stay ahead of it.
Okay. Hey, by the way, your camera probably is a little bit different from my face. And so every now and then just look up into the camera.
Sure.
When you're talking. I'll probably delete what I just told you out of our podcast, but.
Okay. So don't stare at you in the video, stare at the camera.
Yeah, a bit of a mix.
Sounds good.
So Chris, let's go back to the beginning. How did you start this business? Tell us about your beginnings.
Way back to the beginning. Well, if I went all the way back, it would start really in my childhood. I grew up, my parents were sort of pioneers, or back to the landers. They both grew up in New Jersey, moved to Vermont in the 60s to kind of get out of the rat race and try to scratch out a life up in the country. So they had very entrepreneurial spirits early on, and eventually started a Christmas tree farm back in the early 80s. And they had about 200 acres that they farm mostly with Christmas trees. And so I grew up in the trade, really on more of the agriculture side of things. And but really from a young age developed a love of plants and working outside and working with my hands. And my father had started a small nursery and got into a bit of landscaping installation work, and really liked that creative side of it. And I used to tag along with him a bunch, and got some really fond memories of that early on. And he passed away in 90 when I was about 12. And I think I just really always wanted to kind of carry on some of that legacy. So 20 years ago or so, and I was 20 plus years ago, I started doing more and more landscape work just on the weekends for fun, and making some money, and quickly found how much I enjoyed it, and was starting to make more on the weekends than I was making in my day job. And this was before kids and all of that. So had a little small chunk of money, bought a truck and a shovel and a mower, and like most, just kind of headed out and did a bunch of cold calls, knocking on doors, and in and around Chittenden County, and it took off pretty quick. I mean, I had a pretty good knowledge base, and we still had a bit of a nursery out in Cabot, where I grew up in Vermont, and also my mother, who's a big resource for horticulture and design and things like that. So early on, I had some good support, and I, like most, started mowing lawns and doing what I had to do, but was really interested, mostly in construction and installation and design. And so, I'd kind of mow a few days a week and then do the installation towards the end of the week. And very quickly it grew and created a monster.
So your company is almost 20 years old.
Yeah, 2004. So I guess that would make this our 18th or 19th season.
Yeah.
Which is, I always kind of shake my head at it. I still consider us like young. I still consider us newbies, just starting to figure it out. But it's been a few years for sure.
So has your growth been steady up to 7 million, or were there some steps you took that helped you jump?
The growth has been pretty steady. In the beginning, it was pretty exponential. I was like, I think the first year I did about 70,000. And then the next I did like 120. So, I mean, that's pretty big growth, but when you're 70, it's not too hard to add another, 40, 50,000. I think I locked into about a 20% growth year over year. I mean, that just to me always seemed like, good target, and it was pretty achievable. And most years we hit that. We've grown every year except we had a couple flat years, one in maybe 15, 16. And then we had a flat year in the COVID year, I think 19. But then we've had a couple big jump years. And in 20, the year after we were flat, we grew almost 50%, which we went from 3.5 to, whatever that was, 5 or something.
Yeah.
Which was a big jump. And there's a lot of reasons for that. Mainly, we kept all of our staff on and had gone long on a lot of materials. So coming out of COVID, we were just ready to, attack the opportunities. But it's been pretty steady, kind of 20%, I'm starting to kind of pull back on that a bit now. It's, it's a lot more at play to grow 20%. But yeah, it's been pretty steady, I would say.
How big do you think you can get in the Burlington area?
I think, without adding, really any other service lines, I think we can do comfortably about 15 here.
All right.
In Chittenden County, or, from this location, I should say.
Yeah.
Before we would have to start traveling a lot more or taking on either clients that we currently don't fit our model or, potentially other service lines, which we've considered. I've got it. We've talked about this quite a bit, and I've got it at about 15 million. And that's about what I think our location would support just from an operations perspective.
Now, I'm going to change topics here a little bit, but it's all connected.
Sure.
Since I've known you, I've always thought of you as a very scientific person. You're big into, what is it, marathons or triathlons? Which one is it?
Triathlon. I'm a recovering triathlete, I'll say. I've come to my senses, and I'm not quite as nuts as I was, but yeah, triathlon I was pretty competitive at for about 5 years.
And where have you run? I think you were in Utah, right? When I was there, you were running.
Yeah, so I do the Iron. My distance was the half Ironman distance, which is 1.2 mile swim, 56-mile bike, and a half marathon, back to back to back. And I think I've done about a dozen of those races. One was in St. George, Utah,
Yep.
Which was right around the time you were there, I think. But I've done them in Florida, New York. Kind of forget now, but sort of all over the country, traveled around for them.
Any outside the country?
No, never did any outside of the country, but definitely had that on the horizon. They're worldwide now, and they do the worlds somewhere different every year. So I always kind of thought it would be fun to do a travel trip and a triathlon at the same time. But there's a lot of science and a lot of data involved in training and racing in those races, even just to kind of finish. So I really enjoyed that side of it, but I would never consider myself much of a scientist, so it's funny to hear that.
Yeah, no, I as I recall when we first met and we were talking about working together, you were like getting really deep. I was
Analytical.
I was going to say anal, but you're just getting really deep on like, how do we measure progress and what will success look like? And let's lay that out step by step. And so were you always that way? And did you always apply that to your business, or
was I always that much of a pain in the butt?
Yeah, exactly.
Probably. I would say, my approach to business, especially early on, was probably overly analytical of decision making. It's interesting, as I would say, as a leader, that has been a goal of mine, something that I've been working on, personally developing, is my ability to make faster decisions based on more limited amount of data.
Okay.
And so, but I really, I would since I was a child, and just talk to my mother, say, you would really go back and forth and back and forth and back and forth on things, and really have to sort it out in your head before you move forward. And so I really, I try to beat things up from a lot of different angles, to understand it. I think really that's what it is. I've struggled with ADD, my whole life. And I think for me, it's been a tool for me to really understand situations or problems. I have to kind of like overly, I kind of look at them in multiple different ways to put the model together in my head. So, which can be a pain in the butt for my staff, or guys like you, or else.
Well, I love numbers, so I love having you as a client. But when we first met, I was like, I don't know.
This guy.
But do your employees love you or hate you?
I would say it's probably a love-hate. I've got a lot of long tenured staff here. And so hopefully that means something. We've got a really good relationship. I think in my 20 years of doing this, I definitely have calmed down a bit with that.
Yeah.
I'm starting to really see the value in letting them make their own mistakes and letting the company make some mistakes, and not taking on the burden of really having to understand it left, right, and center before moving forward, and maybe beta testing some stuff. And we're at a size now, and fairly profitable, where we can afford to make a couple of mistakes for potentially a bigger better outcome. So I've kind of chilled out a little bit. You'd have to ask some of my staff what they'd have to say.
Well, I'll get to ask your staff, because you're going to be host of our peer group, the one you're in of my peer groups, coming up shortly. So
Yeah, we're looking forward to having you. It's going to be a good time. June in Vermont is about the prettiest time you could be here, and we're all looking forward to hosting. And it's a good opportunity for us to sweep under the carpets and in the corners and get everybody straightened out, ready to greet you guys and show you a good time.
yeah, it's going to be awesome. But I want to, before I lose track here on this whole metrics discussion. So
Sure.
You're good at analyzing. You call it overanalyzing, which is interesting. And you're really I'm proud to say one of my not most profitable, but high profit clients and members of a peer group. In fact, you and I did a podcast for those listening. We did one on the whole topic of throughput with a few other gentlemen that like 2 years ago, I think. For those that are listening, you can go back. And so have you been able to teach your team to be analytical like you and use metrics to help steer their decisions?
Yes. Yes and no. Yes, on throughput and revenue and profit per hour, and how we use those tools to not just estimate our work, but to really understand what work we want and what work we don't want. That's just kind of common knowledge now throughout anybody who is in a sales or management role here. It's all we talk about. And I think everybody really understands how to use it and how to calculate it and how to kind of look at it as one of the biggest kind of metrics on if the job is the right job for us and how we have to price it. Something that I'm, the reason I said yes and no, something that I'm working on now quite a bit is setting up my couple of my key leaders to really be able to understand all of the numbers and run their divisions from kind of top down. And that's been successful, but we still have a lot of work to do on that front.
Yeah.
And part of the challenge is, I've never really had any formal training in any of this, right? So while I like to be analytical, I'm probably not the best equipped to teach it in the most efficient and effective way, because sort of learn a lot of this stuff myself. So,
well, we'll give you that feedback when we're there.
All right, I'm ready.
And so you've done really well profit wise, and have you thought about how the expansion is going to impact your profitability? Because it sounds like you're on a path to double the size of your company. It's just a matter of speed. And so are you slowing down growth to try to keep the profit up while you're growing? Or tell me how you see those two interacting.
That's a really good question. I think so. For this year, we have slowed growth a bit. Last year we had a little bit of a stutter step. We came out of 2021, at like about 21.5% net. And last year I think we were down at 15.5, which is still solid, but we were off our budget by a couple points, which we hadn't missed in a while.
Yeah,
our budget was at 17.5, and there was very clear reasons for that. And so this year, we've got a couple different strategies. One, we've got some planned exit of some maintenance and snow clients that were just no longer profitable for us. And so while we're going to see a reduction in revenue, our profit is going to go up because we put out some pretty big increases this year. and also are saying no more on the maintenance side of things. And there's just, there's a couple of other, changes that we made kind of operationally that we felt like we might need to kind of ratchet the bigger growth of 20% on install back a bit so that the somewhat newer team can really take hold and kind of start running efficiently before we step our foot on the gas. So this year I think we budgeted for, I think it's maybe 12%. I can't remember. I should know this, 12 or 15% over last year. So it's a little less, and because it's more important for me to bring those profit numbers back up so we can build a reserve so we can fuel our growth. Which, yeah, I mean, we do plan on doubling, and it's going to take a lot of work to get there, and it's going to take a lot of cash to get there, and it's also going to take a really strong team, and that's probably the biggest challenge in any kind of rapid growth is keeping the team engaged and not burnt out.
Yeah.
So one thing that helps with that is when you're really profitable, and we put a profit sharing plan in place a couple of years ago, and so that really obviously helps too. So that's the goal, is to kind of ratchet the growth back just a tiny bit and hopefully get our profit numbers back up and be able to step on the gas again.
You mentioned that you overanalyze, and I want to give you a compliment because since you've joined the peer group, what I've seen is a methodical, not overanalyzing, but a methodical step forward in implementing profit sharing and making key hires. Like, you've really been steadily on the move and have made, I think, some great moves since you've come from the outer circle into my inner circle, so to speak. How do you see it?
Yeah, I mean, I'm pretty critical of myself, and it's nice to hear that perspective. I told you I'm a bit ADD, so I don't really see my approach as methodical as you might, but it's always been important for me to kind of put something into play at least each year that's a big difference, or hopefully is going to make a big difference or a big impact. Profit sharing, adding a bigger benefit, a key hire, a new software, something like that, and that has I think it keeps everybody engaged. It keeps me engaged. I kind of don't do well, and it's just sort of the same status quo, and so it keeps, I think, all of us engaged. And I think it's the team, especially the frontline team. They want to know that we're working on things to take care of them, and we're working on new things to be innovative and stay ahead of the curve. And so I would say that, I guess it's methodical in the sense that every year I try to do something like that. And typically, sometimes they fail, but most of the time it, makes a pretty big impact, if not on anything else, on culture, which is, just as important as anything else. So,
yeah. Well, but you've also added some key hires. I mean, I don't have memorized, but tell me the last 2 or 3 big hires you've made.
Yeah. So I've had the most success, I mean, probably like most, with organic growth from within. So some of my key staff now, my key leaders are, folks that have grown into those positions and not hired into those positions.
The key promotions.
Yeah, key promotions. And that's been a lot of fun. And that's also been, a good kind of a little bow tie on our story, which is that one of the reasons for growth Not only is it fun and exciting, but it creates opportunity for the team.
Yeah.
And, that's easy to say, but when you can point to a project manager that started out, in the field, or, a senior account manager that started out in the field, or, a key foreman that started out as a laborer, 12 years ago. Those are real stories of, growth and success, not just for the company, but for the staff. And, the only reason that we've been as successful as we've been over the last 20 years from day one is because we've gotten the right people on board. I've gotten the right people on board because, I knew pretty quickly that if I was the smartest guy in the room, we were going to be in big trouble. And so that has been really nice to be able to do, to make these promotions, and then also show that, hey, we're also walking the walk. I did make a hire, a new controller about 12 months ago. A gentleman came on. He was actually 20 years at Pfizer, completely different industry, but obviously running a pretty big book of business over there, and came with some really great corporate background and processes and systems to kind of help us think a little differently. And that's been working out really well. I've recently promoted a project manager into an install division manager, and also our production manager into our maintenance manager. And both of them have been here for 5 years, and started out, the install manager actually started out in the field just 5 years ago with experience, and they're working out great. We have a lot of fun. So there's been some key hires, and we've also made some mistakes. I've made a couple mistakes as well, and learned from those. But our core staff is solid.
That really helps keep the profit up as you're growing. What about your design sales guy? Is that somebody that was he a promotion or a hire?
Yeah, he's a big hire. Sorry, I didn't mean to leave you out there, Tyler. So we also I hired on a landscape architect about 12 months ago. I think like he's been here now forever. That's why I don't even think of him as like a new hire. But yeah, he came on a year ago. We recruited him from out in the Midwest, and he's just plugged right in. Not only is he a great culture fit, but he's a landscape architect, so he's also brought some different thinking. We felt like with the bigger projects we were doing, maybe our average design build project had been like 50 to 75,000, and now it's, our bigger ones we're doing projects, that are $500,000 plus. We needed more detail, and needed, somebody that had more kind of attention to detail, and like to manage details, and knew how to spec all those things out. And he's brought a lot of that to the table, and is also just a great guy all around, and clients love him, and he's been a good fit. So we're really excited about him as well.
What's he going to sell this year?
Well, he's still kind of ramping a bit. He inherited a lot of work when he started. He'll sell about $2 million this year, maybe 2.5. Yeah.
Gotcha. Yep. So how many other sales people on that team?
So we've got on the install side, we've got Tyler, who's our design build. Anything kind of larger scale, over 50, really over 75,000 is he takes on anything that's requiring design. Drew is our kind of smaller residential. He's a project manager, so he does design. He works in Vectorworks, but he's also managing the crew, so he does a little less. But he's got 2 crews, and he'll do about $1.5 million this year. He's shorter lead time, so he's selling work and he's doing it 8 weeks later.
Yeah.
Whereas the work that Tyler is designing now, most of what's being sold now is for 2024. So his sales.
It's funny how 8 weeks has become the shorter lead time
Isn't it?
definition.
Isn't it? I used to feel like we were booked out if we were 8 weeks out. Now it's, 8 weeks. People are jumping for joy when we tell them 8 weeks.
Yeah.
So, and then my install manager, he's still doing bid build work, but he's kind of delegating that down a bit within the office. But he sold like 3.5 million last year. It'll probably come down to about another, I don't know, maybe 2 this year. So, between the three of them, they're going to sell around 5 to 5.5 or so this year.
Okay.
Well, most of that's going to be for 2024, or already is for 2024.
So it sounds like you've got a lot of success. And what I mean sounds like, I'm just saying, as somebody listening, it's like, wow, a lot of success. So tell us about a screw up or problem that tell us about a couple of the pimples here that have happened along the way.
Well, there's been a lot. There has been a lot. I would say that also trying to drive growth too fast. One of the things that's been our success has also been a mistake, and it's not just that, but with that comes a lot of responsibility to keep your eye on the ball even more. And it's really hard to do. My approach is, even though I'm very analytical, my approach to goals of any kind have been, you've got to focus on the goal, and you've got to be okay with the fact that things over to the left and over to the right might get a little messy. Especially for me with, attention, I need to really stay focused. And, what I found is you can't really do that. Or you've got to put processes or people in place to pay attention to those things on the left and right, because they can come back to bite you. And so through hard, driving growth, we've taken our eye off the ball on things like unapplied time or, downtime, financial controls, employee burnout, things like not staying ahead of my key staff as far as growth plans for them go. Growth for growth's sake is great, and sure, we're going to make a profit. There's going to be a profit share, but most people, especially talented individuals, they want to know, well, what's my job going to look like in a year if I execute? And it's hard to find time to do all that when you're slogging through trying to grow 20-30%. So I'd say growing, pushing for growth without some of the right processes in place have come back to bite me or us pretty bad a few times.
It sounds like, I'm sort of interpreting what you're saying. When you go after a big goal like a triathlon or a new software or profit sharing, whatever your big goal is, even though you're ADD, you've got to be like triply focused to prepare and complete that triathlon and maybe beat your numbers that you're trying to beat.
Mm-hmm.
And what I'm hearing you say is, to do that, you'd have to sort of ignore what's going on the left and right, but that doesn't work in a business, or that just doesn't work.
Exactly. I mean, it works to a degree, but it comes with consequences, and depending on what it is, those consequences can be big. Financial controls, obviously extremely important for a business of any size. So that's something that can be managed and refined. And I think, while I'm analytical, I do also like to just kind of, once I've decided on a route or a goal, I'm kind of just headstrong right towards it. And I do get hyper focused on that and tend to, just kind of push those things off. And I'm well aware that it may get messy. And so I think I've developed a culture around me and behind me like that as well. And so saying, okay, well, let's slow down and let's talk about, okay, what are some of the things that are going to show up on the left and right, and who's going to handle those, or how are we going to deal with those, or how are we going to get in front of them before they become an issue? Are some conversations that are being had.
Yeah. How has being a member of our Leaders Edge peer group helped you with this whole decision-making process and keeping track of the left and right? And
yeah, well, like I said earlier, I mean, decision-making in general, I have, I feel like I've made some good decisions here and there, but I would not say is my strong suit, not making quick, good decisions. And I think having the resources of the group have been great, because I've got now 15 other guys that I can put something out to and say, hey, look, this is what's going on. This is what I'm thinking. Can somebody, tell me why I should or shouldn't do this? And, not everybody responds, but you'll get 2 or 3 pieces of wisdom or feedback on it that typically is just enough for me to hear, to confirm what I was thinking, or say, oh, shoot, I really got to go back to the drawing board on this. That's nice. That's been, the on-site visits have been great. And, the meetings that we do once a quarter are great, but it's probably more the day-to-day stuff that goes back and forth via text and email and things like that. And it's also fun to answer when it's nice to be able to provide some value to others. If you see something come through that you're like, oh, I think I know the answer to that, or I've done this before. It's nice to be able to contribute in that way. And it also kind of, it makes you feel like maybe you got it. Maybe you got that thing figured out, whatever it is.
Yeah.
So that's been nice. It's also just giving good perspective on, Vermont's a really small market. I think we're one of the biggest. I don't know, there's maybe a couple guys, couple other firms in the state that are around our size, maybe a touch bigger, but it's a relatively small market. So, if I were to say, hey, I want to go and visit the guy down the road who's doing twice as much as us, that's just not possible. And so being able to join the group where there's very similar companies that are doing 20 million a year, and, be able to kind of learn from them and see what they're doing, hopefully learn from some of the mistakes they made when they were my size before I have to make them. That's been pretty nice too.
So I want to talk about a couple of personal things as we're getting towards the end of this.
Sure.
So you said you stopped doing triathlons. How come? Or have you not stopped?
Well, I stopped racing. COVID. So, I had been, I'm pretty competitive. And so when I got into it, when I first started 5 years before I stopped, kind of friend of mine, it was almost as like a challenge. He said, hey, I'm going to do this crazy thing. And I said, well, listen, I've never even swam. I can do like the side stroke doggy paddle, let alone swim at 1.2 miles. But I got into it and very quickly got competitive about it. And it was like, look, there's 1,200, 1,500 people in these races. I want to be finishing in the top 5 or 10%. How am I going to get there? And so I put a lot of time into it, just like anything else. I mean, I would train 15 to 20 hours a week. And so I was getting up at like 4 o'clock in the morning. I would go to the pool, swim, get on the bike, maybe even get a run in and be in the office by 8 o'clock most days. And, it was a lot, and I had to be very disciplined, which for me is good. When I have too much time on my hands, I, don't do well, but it was so disciplined. And because of that discipline, the results showed up, and I had a goal to race Lake Placid, which, as you know, the Olympics were there. I had done a race there and had finished pretty strong. And I set a goal for myself for the next year And I went out a year later and raced it with my cousin, who's also my best friend. And I absolutely crushed it. And I left everything out there, beat my goal, and I couldn't have been happier. You know, it was tears of joy at the end and everything else. And I was banged up for a couple of weeks. And I, was like, I almost felt like I had arrived. You know, I was like, okay, I kind of did this thing. And that was the fall before COVID hit. So I continued training through the winter and was starting to think about my races for the following year, and COVID hit. And then my focus just shifted. It was more about obviously, protecting the business and, protecting my family and spending more time at home like everybody else. And then my priorities shifted, and I realized it was time to remain active. And I still swim and bike and run and do those things, but I'm doing it more for fun. I'm on my mountain bike a lot more, and hiking more, and going out with my kids. I was just mountain biking with my two daughters last night, which I didn't have a whole lot of time for that when I was racing. So
Yeah.
there'll probably be another one on the horizon at some point, but maybe when I'm 50, and I'll do another Ironman just to kind of check that off the box. But right now I'm kind of enjoying just having my bike in the back of my truck and being able to kind of do whatever I want rather than it being too disciplined. So,
but you've had one or maybe a couple accidents since then.
Yeah, so I've had an interesting year. I had a mountain bike accident last summer. I got a severe concussion.
Like severe. You were out.
I was out. I was out of commission, like completely out for about a month, and I've had symptoms. The biggest being I couldn't really look at a computer screen.
Right.
And even now, I still have some residual impact from that, where if I'm on the screen too long, it gives me a migraine, which has been a blessing and a curse. On one hand, obviously it was really tough, and any injury is tough, but my team really had to step up, and they didn't even really have to step anywhere. They showed how valuable they were, and they were just continued to crush and filled in where needed for me, which was great. I don't know what we would have done if the company wasn't where it is today, and I didn't have the team that I had, because I really was out of commission for a couple of months.
Yeah.
So that was I learned a lot of lessons from that. I also learned what we were able to achieve with me. I couldn't even respond to an email. So it was pretty impressive, and I was very, very proud of that, and still am. So yeah, right around the time I was got back on my feet, so to speak, I was skiing this winter, and kind of on a part of the mountain that I'm very familiar with. One of the first big powder days of the year, early January, and went off of just a small cliff, little drop that I've dropped 100 times. I've skied it with my kids, and ended up basically falling at the top and landed on my neck and fractured two vertebrae in my neck. Ended up having to have spinal fusion surgery. So I was out again for another bit of time, but I had my head. And so I was working from the hospital and working from my house. I actually made a key hire. I hired an account manager via Zoom, I think, 2 days after surgery when I was in the hospital. So that didn't slow me down too much aside from physically. I have recovered just about 100% from that. Surgery was very successful, and I'm back on my bike and back to doing silly things again.
I gotta ask, Chris, have you learned anything from this?
Well, I'm getting older. I'm learning that. I've been doing this stuff since I was 5, racing, running around on dirt bikes and jumping off stuff, and never seemed to get that hurt. But I think we're a little more brittle as we get older. So I think keeping my feet on the ground and slowing down a bit is kind of the name of the game, and I've really been embracing that. So I'm taking up some things like yoga and more hiking and, just more on my road bike and trying to stay on the ground, less airborne, seems to be the name of the game. So,
Well, I've learned that you're an adrenaline junkie. I guess I didn't quite realize that.
Maybe, yeah, maybe it might be that.
When you had your concussion, my son had a very bad concussion, and he's still sort of recovering. It's like has this long. It was a couple of years ago, but and he was like had to stay in his room for a few months. The shades down, couldn't look at the computer. So I knew what you were going through. And when others in the group, the peer group, may have been a little frustrated, I kind of knew, serious concussions can take a long time. So yeah. I could relate to you in that. And I'm glad you're better. And I don't know how you rebound that quickly from breaking your neck, but hopefully you've learned a lesson.
Got a lot to do. We've got a lot to do. So quick side story, and this also I think helps maybe your listeners understand kind of the market here and how small it is. So, I break my neck. I'm in the hospital. The surgeon comes to meet with me. He's going over the whole thing. It seems very, there's a lot of risks. There's a lot of questions. And he says to me, well, you certainly can get another opinion. And I said, I think I might want to do that. And he's like, I just want you to know that I've actually reviewed your case with the chief neurosurgeon because he had an interest in this. He said he knows you. I'm not going to name him on here, but it just so happens that we this summer are doing a very large project for the chief neurosurgeon. I knew he was a surgeon. I didn't know he was the neurosurgeon. And so he came to visit me the next day in my room and sat. And we're doing this really nice project for him. And I said, you need me around. You need me to be around for your job. Make sure everything goes well. So you're going to take good care of me. And of course, he got a good chuckle out of that, and he did. And so that was fun, and it it was the kind of thing that really only happens in a small state. And then in the operating room, I had my neighbor was the nurse in the room, and so I was really well taken care of. But yeah.
Okay, are we going to see his project when we come visit you?
I don't know. I think he's. I told him I would bump him up if he got me recovered quickly, but I don't think it's going to be done by June. So we'll find something else for you to come and see.
All right, excellent. Hey, this has been a lot of fun, and appreciate you sharing, being open with everybody about what's going on. Any final? Do you want to leave people with a final thought here?
No, I think we covered it. I mean, this has been fun. I've done one other podcast with you, and it's I think it's good exercise for me as a leader to kind of vocalize some of the things that rattle around in my head. So I appreciate the opportunity, and I'm flattered that you feel I've got something worthwhile sharing with the rest of your community.
It's been great to get to know you better. I think in the last podcast I mentioned to you that I have a lot of childhood memories of Burlington and Lake Champlain. My sister went to UVM, and I would drive up in my first car I ever bought for $300, this BMW 1600 series, and we would drive it on the lake. The lake would freeze, and I remember you go to drive, and the first foot is water for some reason, so you have to take this little faith plunge that the lake's actually frozen. And we ended up doing 60-mile-an-hour practice spins, and we spent all day on the lake. And then I almost killed me and my three good friends. We're 60 miles an hour. We're sliding sideways past this big log. Must have been like a foot radius, or not a radius, but whatever, foot wide, just big branch sticking out. We slide past it. It's in front of us. And we all kind of go white, ooh.
That was close.
We've just pressed our luck here. we better get off the lake. It was dusk. A lot of great memories of.
Yeah, we there's always a half a dozen stories in the paper every year of city folk or flatlanders like yourself coming up to Vermont and going out in the lake and ending up down in the bottom. So I'm glad that didn't end up being you. But
This is a long time ago when I'm assuming things were colder back then. Is that an accurate assumption?
Well, even before all of the talk, even before, global warming was so prevalent and it was discussed as much as it is now, even when I was a child, I remember the old timers in my town talking about how much colder it was and how much more snow there was, 40 years prior. So, from my memory, it used to be colder and there used to be a lot more snow. If you look at the data, the snow, we're getting about the same snow, but it is getting a little warmer. And there has been years where there's been very little ice on the lake.
Yeah.
And then there's other years where we get a good freeze. And so be cautious. When you're up here in June, and I'm not sure if you're bringing one of your nice cars, but there's certainly not going to be any ice on the lake.
I'll bring my $300 car.
Yeah, exactly. Boy, if you could buy a car for $300, it'd be worth just driving out in the lake and putting in the bottom.
Yeah. Hey, this has been a great time.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Jeffrey.
Thank you.